Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Amanda Passmore-Ott's poetry collection, Human Wilderness. So Amanda is actually a colleague of mine here at Penn State in the English department. And so that's how I found out about her book. It is a recently published book. I will put a link down below in the description if you're interested in buying it. So I really like this collection of poetry. I like nature poetry, personally. I'm a big fan of it. And what Amanda's poems tend to do is to utilize a wide range of natural imagery, from the sort of empty husk of a cicada shell to the changing colors of leaves, to various types of birds, to a river flooding, overflowing its banks, etc., to explore this sort of deep-seated longing that I think most of us as human beings have, to one degree or another, to feel that we're part of the natural world, right? Because this is one of the weird complexities of the human condition, is that we are objectively part of the natural world, right? Physiologically, we are animals. We exist within the limitations and the resources of the natural world. We depend on the natural world for agriculture. We depend on it for sustenance of various kinds, for environmental conditions, etc. And yet, we tend, especially in the West, to think of ourselves as separate from nature. And part of this comes out of the Abrahamic tradition, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, where God created humanity to be the sort of shepherds of nature, or whatever it is, the stewards of nature, rather than as a unified part of the natural world. There's also the argument that comes from Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, who basically says language is what cuts us off from our sense of collective being with the universe. What he calls the symbolic order separates us. It introduces a form of castration, which in this case is not sort of literal physical castration, but a sense that we as subjects are somehow divided. And so I think that human longing to feel that we're part of the natural world, to feel that we're part of the world around us, is a very deep-seated experience. And I happen to know, because we're Facebook friends, that Amanda spends a lot of time hiking, kayaking in local rivers. She spends a lot of time out in nature, mushroom hunting, all this kinds of stuff. So for her, these are very sort of organic experiences. So I want to read you some of these poems and sort of think about some of the connections with them. So the first poem in the collection is called A Winged Crossing. I really like this one. I think it does a great job setting the tone for the collection. That's part of the reason I like it so much. So, A Winged Crossing. I will consider this husk of cicada, skeletal legs pinned to the trunk in spruce sap. I will become that frame, outline where body pressed its salty self out of flesh. I will attempt beauty because I'm supposed to be able to do this, and I won't settle for anything less. I shed myself over and over, remaining thinner than bone. I will let the husk of cicada be a husk of cicada. What is it you see? What lingers, molting where skin casts off? If there is beauty, it is in not knowing. A winged crossing of this field, cocoons bobbing on the ends of wheat or sweet peas, edge where shells tether themselves like a scent, smoking from burn barrels, lingering before losing themselves against the sky. So again, there is this really interesting interplay between the self of the poet persona, I will consider this husk. I will become that frame. I will attempt beauty. I will let the cicada be the husk of cicada. There is that, clearly there's that element in which the poet persona is seeking these connections with nature, and the choice of an empty cicada husk is such an interesting one, because cicadas are these weird creatures, right? Like, they're most people today, especially in the West, regard them as pests. They're very loud, they're very sort of bumbling, they're not pretty in a conventional sense, in the way that most people regard things like butterflies as pretty. And yet they actually are really interesting creatures that play a surprisingly important role within food systems, ecological cycles, etc., etc. They're also apparently edible. Supposedly they're quite tasty. I have no real plans to eat one. But this image of an empty cicada husk, an empty husk, right? It's a complex image, right? Because on the one hand, it is the thing that's left behind when the creature moves on or dies, whatever it is. Either the creature sort of molts and it leaves its shell. I think cicadas do that, though I'm not 100% sure. You can fact check me in the comments if you want. Or the cicada dies, and like many insects, the inside sort of, dissolve, and you're left with a sort of shell of what was once a living creature. So you've got that element of loss, that element of death or abandonment of a particular phase of life. But the empty shell also becomes this sort of fillable vessel, right? It becomes something that the poet persona can sort of fill with the ambitions, fill with the desire to be part of this natural world. In almost a good sort of metaphor might be with like, what are the crabs? I can't think of the specific type of crab, right? But there's the crabs that, like, they will leave their shell and go find a larger shell when they outgrow it, and then another crab can move in to that shell. So that idea of like, I have abandoned this, but that doesn't mean that it's useless. It's just useful to someone else. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to start the collection. And again, it sets a lot of these thematic concerns going. So the next one I want to read for you is called Severe Weather Warning. Thunderheads stack above Blue Knob where windmills catch the updraft. How often we need a manifestation to see the invisible. Only last night bats untucked from the chimney flickered across the indigo horizon to disappear against the stars. How much wind must feel under wings of steel and bone, deep in the gut of cloud light gathers. I wait, drowning in my own breath. And so again, there is this sort of element of, at once, the overwhelming power and separateness of the natural world, and yet again, that is linked for the poet persona with these individual experiences, the ways in which we as individuals are located within the world itself, right? So these sort of interconnected elements. On the one hand, this is about the contrasts between the animal, the natural, the living, and the man-made, right? The windmills versus the wings of the bats. each of which sort of catches breeze in these particular ways. And yet they're profoundly different. But then we have this line, these two lines at the end. I wait, drowning in my own breath. And again, we have this, the poet persona sort of entering this contested space, this space of multiple possible meanings, of ambiguity. So it's an interesting poem in that sense. The last one I want to read for you, the last full poem I want to read for you, is Footnote to My Living Will. I want that burnt hue of copper fanned out, vertical beams to catch the light of beams of light to catch the red under a hawk's wing. On plains I'm aware were meant for rising like this, even without slight hollow bones, falling where faces live abstract outlines. The sky is not necessarily a story our spirits can lay claim to. Nevertheless, burn my body when all is said and done. If gravity can't hold me, heaven has no choice but to take. So again, we have similar things going on here with the interplay of the mechanical or the human and the natural, right? Hawk's wings versus the experience of flying on a plane. That humanity needs these mechanical devices to fly, whereas birds, because of their physiology, because they have hollow bones and things like this, they're actually physiologically able to do this thing that human beings are not. And so we have those complexities at work. But then also this idea that through cremation and through a sort of metaphysical almost, but also physiological in the sense that the smoke of cremation will rise, but this sort of metaphysical in the sense, I think, of the soul. This idea of rising up into the sky, of becoming bird-like in a way, becoming almost lighter than air and being able to join with nature, to be able to join with the natural world, or in this case, with heaven, right? Because there is this sort of overlap, I think, in these images between heaven and the natural world. I mean, this is I don't know, this may be more of a religious poem than I'm really giving it credit for, but I don't want to call it a sort of new agey reading that I'm doing, because that has sort of connotations of whatever that hand gesture means, but there is that perspective, right? That nature is divine in some ways, that nature is holy. And so I don't think it's a bad reading necessarily to say that when this poem ends with the lines, if gravity can't hold me, heaven has no choice but to take, that there is an element of almost animism here, right? A religious belief in the holiness of the natural world. There's one more thing, very, very brief, I want to read you. I think this is, I don't know, I find these lines fascinating. The poem itself, I'm not going to read you as a whole. It's from the poem Tell, which is the second poem in the collection. But I find these lines absolutely fascinating, and I can't really wrap my head around why I find them so great. So this is from about slightly below the middle of the poem. It is always like this. We dream of what goes unremembered and lose it again when we wake. Wrap them around peripheries of our lives, wear them like talismans. Again, I find that such a striking passage, and I don't know why. I haven't yet figured out why I like it so much or what I like about it, but I think it's really, really good.